So this is the version of this that you should have access to, and we are going to fill this out together. I want to lift up that Regina said we were sort of having this fun little side chat brainstorming of all of the ways you can set up a garden other than in rows. And Regina said, right plant, right spot, right time. You can't grow a cactus in a swamp. And that is exactly the spirit behind this exercise. So we know that some kinds of gardens need certain conditions. And so some kinds of religious education and faith formation require certain congregational ecosystems. So we are going to walk through together this process of mapping your own congregation's ecosystem. So think of your own congregation as we do this. If you belong to or work for or in some way are in two congregations or more than two congregations, you can either pick one or you can do this for one of them now and another one later. Or if you're really ambitious, you can try and do them both at the same time. If you are not in a congregation, like those of us who work directly for the UUA, spend time in lots of congregations and not a particular one. Then you can either choose one of the congregations you know, or you can think about sort of the bigger association.
And Erica, this
Yes.
is Lenore. Do we have folks who are gathering in person who need to get these materials out right now?
Yeah, if you're gathering in person, this is the time to get your packet of all of the different things that could go in your ecosystem. All right, so we start with the soil. So these are the things that are like down at the bottom that really impact the kind of ecosystem that we are. So we start with numbers because we know that um, not because there's a better or worse kind of number soil to have, but because we know that the size of a community dramatically impacts the kinds of things that really thrive there and the kinds of things that really don't. So you can fill in the number of adults, kids, and youth in your community. Also, your congregation staff are part of our people, both your particular staff and their particular gifts, and also the degree to which you have staff that you pay or not. So you can fill in your congregation's staff. Some of you, that will take a very long time. Some of you have nothing to put there and everything in between. So go ahead and do that. And then also part of our soil, our very bottom layer, is our mission or purpose and our values. So when I say mission or purpose, I mean the congregation's collective sense of why we are here being a congregation in this place at this time. Some congregations have a mission statement that uh, really describes this, right? That everybody either knows it by word for word or the spirit of it is well known and it works. Other congregations don't have a mission statement, or they have one that was written 30 years ago that nobody remembers because it's in a drawer somewhere. Um, so I'm not necessarily talking about the statement as much as I'm talking about the spirit of like, we know why we're here. This is what we're here for. Some congregations have a hard time with this and are not in a space where everybody in the congregation can answer this or who don't all have the same answer for it. And that is also part of the soil. It's part of a soil that means we might need to have a conversation about that. And then also our values. So we have a certain set of values that we share as Unitarian Universalists. And also your congregation may have particular values among that list or slightly different that particularly important to you. So that is the mission and purpose and the values.
Erica, in the chat, I see a question from Shannon. Could you repeat the mission and values?
Sure. So these are down here in the soil, and the mission or purpose is your congregation's collective sense of why are we here doing this thing of congregational life in this time and place, which may be a mission statement that the congregation knows and shares, or it may not be so simple as being a statement that everyone knows. It might be more of a sense of shared purpose that is not in sort of written form, or you may have a congregation where different folks have different ideas about what the purpose is. All of those are different kinds of soil in which different kinds of plants will grow. And then we have our values. So we have shared values as Unitarian Universalists. Those are love at the center, justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity. For the non-religious educators among us today, that spells JETPIG. That's the way that a lot of people are learning to remember them. And then your particular congregation may have either one or two of those values that are particularly important to you, or you may have some values that are particularly important to you as a congregation that are not on that list or are said differently than they're on that list. And all of that is an important part of the soil that your congregation grows in. If your mission statement is like a page long, you can just put the keywords here. You don't have to copy it out. Okay, so in addition to the soil that you are growing in, you have things around you. So some of our congregations are right in the middle of big cities. Some of our congregations are way out in the country. There should be a comma between rural and suburb. Some of our congregations are in the suburbs. Some of our congregations are in places that do not neatly fall into the categories of urban, rural, or suburb. Some of our congregations are surrounded by lots of other communities, religious communities, and other organizations that share our values. Some of us are in places where most of the communities and organizations around us do not share our values. Some of us have UU congregations like literally the next town over. Some of us you have to drive or fly hours to get to the nearest UU congregation. So just make a few notes about what is around you. And if you're in person, you can choose the picture to put on your map of what is around you. All right, and in this soil, in this ecosystem, there are some things growing. And we're going to start by talking about our two biggest programs, our biggest program overall and the biggest part of religious education or faith formation. So by biggest here, we mean the one that the most people come to. So for most congregations, the biggest overall program is Sunday morning worship. But there are occasional congregations where something else is bigger. So whatever the biggest program is for you, you're going to list in the biggest program overall. And then the biggest part of the RE program or faith formation program is again what does the most of us like what do most people come to? What's the biggest in terms of attendance? And just list those. And then we're going to talk about them both in a lot more detail. So right now just just list what they are. So now we are going to fill in a ton of details. So those of you in person, this is the leaves that you can fill out and put on. And those of you looking at this graphic with me, these are all the leaves. So things like, when does it happen? Where does it happen? What are you actually doing? Who is involved? Who is not involved? Any other details? I'm going to give you a good couple of minutes to work on this one because it's much bigger. So take some time and fill in the details of your two biggest programs. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a minute while you work on that. Oh, good question in the chat. Do you mean you as in the person filling out the sheet or you as in the community? I mean you as in the community, the collective you. Okay, I am going to turn it back over to Lenore for a minute to give us a little more grounding in our story.
Okay, so if we can call back now to this place in your ecosystem to the story with the covenant. Think about this question about what do we teach and learn in these big programs? What is bearing fruit in the story? Like, what are the apples? What's bearing fruit in the story of the covenantal practice in the RE classrooms? So what are the, or you could, and let's put this in the chat. So the question is, what is in this story about the covenantal practice? What is bearing fruit, which is another way of asking, what are we teaching and learning in this practice of the covenant in RE? Where are the apples in this story? And you can go ahead and put a couple answers in the chat. I'll put the question in the chat too. People may be busy filling out their ecosystem, which is okay. So if you're thinking about like your biggest programs, and in this particular story, there was the big RE program, and folks are teaching and learning things in that RE program. We have I just realized I was in the wrong chat. I wasn't seeing anybody. There we go. We are learning accountability to covenant. We are learning promises of how to be together. In this story, folks are learning interdependence, trust, cross-generation connections. Okay. So thank you we're sort of practicing, like there's the thing that they're practicing, and then there's what are they teaching and learning and what's growing from that, what's bearing fruit. Ooh, cooperation, kindness, and connection are bearing fruit in this story. So now that we sort of delved into a story of how this is operating somewhere else, not in your own program, we can continue with the mapping now to ask the same question for each of you for your programs. Erica?
Thank you. Yeah, so back to our big programs. These are the apples. So what does it teach? Um, you can also add apples because or you can label each apple with more than one thing. What does your biggest congregational program teach, and what does the biggest part of your RE program teach? And are they, some of the same things we've been talking about, cooperation and love and justice, etc. Or are you teaching something really different? Ah, now we also know, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with these slides. That these big things, right, worship and the biggest part of your RE program are not the only things you do. So we're going to hear from Joy for a minute.
And I'll come on screen as well if we can have me and Joy together. All right. Oop. Is the slide up?
Can we?
Cool. Okay, so now we're looking at, again, like what story are we telling and growing in this mapping, in this ecosystem that you're mapping for yourselves. And you've gotten to the place where you found your two biggest things, and then you're starting to think about, okay, what is it that we're actually teaching and growing here? And now we're going to introduce another layer of this ecosystem to think about. And, my friend Joy was telling me a story the other month about some really unexpected places where Joy was finding RE. Joy, can you tell us the story about the Buildings and Grounds program?
Yeah. Yeah, in my last congregation, as we moved into a model, a vision, we did some visioning, that can be important, right? As we moved into a vision for connecting more people around religious education and changing our positionality and relationality, we had an opportunity that I didn't expect. Building and Grounds Committee was really never involved in religious education. I had kind of mapped the different committees and groups in the church and knew that that was an area where we didn't have really any overlap at all. I didn't know why, but I'm interested in variance, so I wanted to try to figure out what was possible there.
So you actually mapped all the programs of
Mhm.
the congregation and you zeroed in on Buildings and Grounds. Okay, cool.
Yeah, like with that adaptable map that I showed earlier, that's an area where, in those spaces where the faith development goals are right now, it's a perfect place to use those to also just map what communities are already. Paula Cole Jones tells us we're a community of communities, and figuring out how to do religious education thinking with those people is an important part of co-gardening. So I checked in with Building and Grounds, and we did not hit it off. We didn't find a place immediately, which is to be expected. It was a very different generational, it was a very gendered group that I think they really liked what they were doing and kind of liked that their church time, their biggest program in church was Building and Grounds. If they were to do this mapping exercise, what was biggest to them. But I asked the Building and Grounds person to show me what they do. And I've hoped to get ideas from that. And we stopped at the Memorial Garden, and I realized there is a sacred story, to use one of our embodied practices from Whole Church Array. There's a sacred story right here at this Memorial Garden. And I've never come here with the children. What have I missed? My goodness. I asked him to tell me about it, and this kind of gruff curmudgeon got kind of soft, got kind of teary-eyed almost a little bit as he spoke about the work that his committee did to sustain and take care of this place, to steward this place. And it was a really special thing. And I said, I would love it if you'd come down to Ari and we could go out together and sit down together in the Memorial Garden and you could talk about this place. And it turned out to be the beginning of a short but meaningful relationship with Building and Grounds. Not only did we learn about the Memorial Garden and tell the stories of the people who came before and why they wanted to have memorial stones here and what that meant and how we could get involved in helping to take care of it, but also an idea emerged when I said, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I never even really think about the Memorial Garden. We came upon the idea that if we don't know our church, then we don't really belong to it. And so we worked with the Building and Grounds folks to have the kids do a tour of the grounds for a couple different Sundays. First, they drew a map of what they thought our church looked like and what they thought the grounds were. And then we went out, did the tour, came back in, mapped it together. Um, and from there came an idea to work with one section of the campus to make it a wildlife protected zone. And that became a really important sort of goal oriented space that I could connect with Building and Grounds off and on about from then on. But we had established a relationship that wasn't there before. And I didn't know, when you disturb the soil as a farmer, when you disturb the soil, what you find out is what's the seed bank, what we call the seed bank, what's in the soil that you haven't seen before because of what else has been growing. And it's the native culture of the soil. And we disturbed that soil by touching domains that hadn't touched there before. And some things grew there that were native and indigenous and deeply valuable to that congregation and that culture. And I think we moved more in the direction of helping our kids feel like they belong to the church and helping our Building and Grounds folks see that this committee they struggled to ever get any help for. I had a couple of kids who brought their families to get involved with some work days because they were so, just engaged with that.
Building that
Yeah.
relationship. Thank you. Thank you, Joy, for sharing that story. And if we could see the next slide. So this, I think, is an example of when we zoom out from the obvious of like what we think that we're doing is the biggest part. And we this is an example of actually going out physically even and doing the like go seeing the flowers of like what else do we teach? What else do you do? And so Erica is going to lead us in doing some of that going out on this virtual map, knowing that you may want to take Joy's story away from this experience and do some of that yourselves as well.
Yeah, thank you. So we are not going to have time today to map every single thing that your congregation does, but I encourage you to think of a couple of places where you have not thought that we are doing faith formation, like perhaps the Buildings and Grounds Committee. Actually, committee meetings in general are a place we don't often think is doing faith formation, but of course, those are all teaching something. Um, and think about uh, what that teaches. So if you want to fill in a few of those, and then you can take the map and do more of that later if it's helpful. All right, and we're gonna pause there. You can come back to that whenever you want. And Lenore is gonna talk to us about these mushrooms that have appeared on our map.
Why are the mushrooms here, Erica? I guess we'll find out soon. But meanwhile, um, we can sort of see that an ecosystem is not just made of the biggest trees or the someone mentioned a permaculture guild around it supporting that, or even the other parts of the landscape where if we wander farther afield, we see that really meaningful, important things are happening there. So as you've labeled, what else do you do? And we know that this could take a whole hour and could convene a whole lot of people around, right? But think also of the humble mycelium. We know that mycelial networks connect forests in deep ways that are becoming better understood by the community of science now. And that one role that the mushrooms that pop up in the deep mycelial networks underneath the soil play is in nourishing the whole ecosystem and in nourishing each of the programs or the flowers or the bushes here in ways that are visible and invisible. So in Joy's story about buildings and grounds, it became clear that there were these invisible connections between the experiences the children had in the landscape of the church and the memorial garden. And so through the relationship building between these individuals and through the tour of what is it that we do in this place, people are able to sort of make visible the mycelial networks that are underneath there. Erica, will you help us figure out how to fill out these mushrooms?
Yeah, so mushrooms are the above ground visible part of the mycelial network. So we might think of them as the visible evidence of underground connections. So where do you find mushrooms in your community? That is, where are you noticing the evidence of connections that you can't necessarily see directly? So, like the parents coming to work days because the kids care about the memorial garden because we connected them to the Buildings and Grounds Committee, for example. Or, um, two members of the congregation who you didn't know knew each other are exchanging support and help in various ways, or other things like that. Where are you seeing evidence of underground connection? Okay, so we are going to give you a little bit of time now to reflect on this mapping process, knowing that we are never going to fully map our entire congregation, but however far we've gotten. Right. So these are the questions that we're going to invite you to reflect on. What do you notice? Does anything surprise you? And what are you proud of? What do you notice? Does anything surprise you? And what are you proud of? Let me just talk a little bit about this exercise that we just did. And thank you for doing it with me. So we did this for a few reasons. One is because in a minute, we are going to start answering the third meet the moment question, which is, how do our values call us to respond to this moment that we're in? And we know that the way that we respond is driven by our values, of course, and also by our context. So, what you do in your congregation to support children, youth, and families in this time is going to depend a lot on what um, your congregation's ecosystem is. And also because um, we want you to have this tool if you want to use it after today. So um, we we've grounded you right now in your own experience to bring into the next conversation, and then you can also um, come bring it home and use it in whatever way is helpful for you now or whenever in the future. Um, you may notice, if you were attentive to the handouts, that I did not ask you all of the reflection questions. The rest of those reflection questions are there for you to reflect on later, on your own or in your community, if that is helpful.